time to talk about everything that you need to know, or maybe some things that maybe you don't need to know about quotes and citations in HTML. So the first thing we want to take a look at is actually a typographic thing. And this is actually pretty important, especially if you want to look really professional, really detail oriented. This is going to be amazing for helping your designers feel seen and heard as well. And that is knowing the difference between a quote and a prime mark. They look pretty similar, and most people won't even tell the difference. Most people will just kind of breeze right past it, especially because we've picked up some bad typing habits thanks to mostly the typewriter. But besides the point, this is a prime mark. This is exactly what you get if you hit your shift and then the quote button on your keyboard. It only changes to these curly quotes if you happen to be using maybe a Mac. Sometimes in some programs will help you to do smart quotes, and so they'll automatically change to these curly quotes instead of these straight looking ones. They actually carry some meaning, and that's why it actually matters. This is not a quote mark, it's a prime mark. So if we look back at our math classes, we have symbols for notation, for like primes. A lot of times we see this with measurements. For example, right here we've got 6 foot 2 inches, and that's how you would read this section right here in English. And so these little marks, they actually mean something, and adding that little detail of like the differentiation between an actual quote, like having something that's narrative that you're reading and it's quoting somebody or something, then that's really nice to be able to see that you've taken the time to actually do that. But it really makes a huge difference, and it just shows off that professional flourish. So if I were to inspect some of the code here, you can see that what we're doing here is we're leaning on HTML entities to change it to a left double quote, which is what this little name here means or stands for, and then a left single quote, and that would be this one right here. And then we've got our right single quote, which is this apostrophe right there. And then finally we've got our right single quote, which is ending this quote within a quote, and then our right double quote, which is ending our full quote. So it's a lot, and it takes some work. We can control this with our CMS or whatever, so we don't have to do this by hand. That's not the ideal way to do that, but that is one way to execute this with HTML. And then of course with the measurement, the height, 6 foot 2 inches, that's just straight up what you got on your keyboard, so it makes it really easy and simple. So if we keep on going, we're going to take a look at a couple of different scenarios. With quotes, it's actually a huge world, right? We've got inline quotes, so something kind of short, and it's right in the middle of your text or whatever. And then we've also got examples where we've got maybe a block quote, like something that kind of is pulled out. It's probably longer than just like a quick sentence or a couple of words that we're quoting. And we also have attribution and citations with those. What do we do when we are citing a work like an article or a book inside of paragraph text? And it's not quoting it exactly, but we're still referencing it. So we want to be able to call that out both visually and in the semantics. And so we're going to cover that. And then of course we've got combos, right? We've got block quotes plus the citation separated from that inside of other text. Stacking quotes because maybe we're quoting a couple of paragraphs, things like that. We're going to cover all of them. So let's go to our first example, which is inline quotes. What do you do when you're trying to just insert some quotes right in the middle of your message? Maybe you're writing something and you want to quote this little quote that comes right from the Sixth Amendment. And the cool thing about this is actually these little quotes, first of all, they are curly quotes, so they are correct. They are actual quote marks. I did not add them in the text. If we pull open the code here, you can see all it is we've got our paragraph, we've got a bunch of text, blah, blah, blah. And then we come to our quote, and we're using the Q element, which is for an inline quote. Most browsers will actually add in that correct quote mark for you, so you don't even have to worry about, is it the left double, right double, you don't have to worry about any of that. So it takes care of it for you. So this is a great solution for if you've got a CMS or something else and you want to be able to help enable this. It's a great way to do it because then they don't even have to worry about it. They just highlight the piece that needs to be quoted and then they choose the Q element. The other thing is with the Q element is we have the option to add in a cite attribute. This is optional, and this is really meant to have like an actual URL that is referencing this quote so that we could potentially go there and like see it. It's not going to be clickable. I can't click on it at all. For the most part, it's kind of an extra thing. I haven't been able to find real proof that this is worth the effort for SEO. So it's more of just like getting the metadata there. So you may be using scripts or something else to enhance your website or like finding information about your website. So it's there. It's maybe decide as you go whether or not this is worth the effort to put in here rather than putting in an actual anchor tag link, because you can always of course do that instead of using the site, but that is technically part of the Q element. So we've got another one right here, and this is basically just a longer quote, and then we've got our byline, we've got our author here, and then we've got the title of the book that this was pulled from. And so what we can see here is we've got our block quote, and then it goes straight after that, it does the attribution. And this is important because of two things. The first one is that you don't have to have a paragraph tag inside of your block quote. It's totally okay to just have block quote element and then go straight into the text. You may want to adjust the margin so that this visually makes a little bit better sense. Kind of depends on the setting of this in context. But I've got a live stream that I did to go over kind of an article's content system. And so it does cover things like what do you do when a block quote is followed by a paragraph tag and that kind of a thing. So check that out if you want to see that full video. But this is also the second part that's really important, is that the attribution should not be inside the block quote. The block quote is for the actual quote. And so we don't want to put anything like this inside of our block quote. That's why it's outside and it's in its own paragraph tag. And of course, we can also use the cite tag for that title. And this is another cool thing that just helps add just a little bit more semantics to your markup, to your long form content. And I think that's just a nice way to just kind of add a little bit of extra information so that machines, bots, SEO crawlers, whatever, they can go through and kind of understand the text without actually understanding it, if that makes sense. So if I'm a bot, I know that, hey, it's citing this, that's supposed to be a title. So that means I know that now that this word is actually a title of something. That just adds just a little bit of meaning to my text. And that's pretty cool. So if we want to just hurry and fix up what we've done here, what I would do is probably do either a margin bottom on our block quote specifically, and that can help with this giving just a little bit of separation, which is really nice and important to consider depending on how your block quotes want to work in your article system. However, it also depends on kind of what kind of layout you've determined. I actually went over in my article system live stream. I actually prefer to do a margin top for your long form kind of text, and the reason why is because we end up with a lot of sibling logic. So what is my sibling before me and what should I do based on that? If it's an image above me, do I change my spacing at all? So I actually probably would do something a little bit more like this. We'll make another block quote. The paragraph is following a block quote. Then we'll do a margin top of 1 rem, and that way we can still basically achieve the exact same thing but in a more logical order. So it just kind of depends on what it is that you're doing, but that's just one way to fix this up. So if we move on to our next example, we've got a citation where we're referencing a title of a work. So in this case, it's a book. It's called An Immense World. And actually, I didn't do any styling to this. All this is coming from the Cite Tag, and we talked about this just barely, but this is really nice because most browsers will probably italicize this, and that makes a lot of sense because at least in English and many of the writing styles, it's going to be italicized anyway, so that's kind of nice that it just comes out of the box. We really don't have to do anything with styles here, and the cool thing is, this is a really easy one to remember, is that if you want to cite a title, if you want to say a title in your text, just use the cite tag to surround it, and then you don't even have to do anything else like fancy. You don't have to try and italicize it or do an EM tag or whatever. Using the cite as the style and takes care of that semantic value of like extra information about what this text actually means. So pretty cool and simple. And then of course we've got this larger one. So if we pop open the code here, we can see this one is a little bit interesting because we're using a figure tag, then we're using a block quote, and then we're using a fig caption, so the caption of the figure, and then that's the closing of the figure. So the reason why we're doing this is because sometimes we need to have a little bit of extra information in our byline. We're referencing the title, we're actually giving a link to that resource, to that book or that article. And then we've got a byline. So we've got like all of these authors here that we wanted to give credit to. The reason why we go through all of that trouble is because we want all of this to be attributed to the block quote. So this figure helps to kind of encapsulate everything to relate to this block quote. And then of course you've got another use case for that article system. So again, I highly recommend checking out that video if you want to see how I kind of figured this out as far as my own system. We won't do it in this video, but basically we just need to find a way to separate the space just a little bit so that it makes a little bit more sense typographically. And then of course we've got all kinds of these where we've got big long quotes. This one is a block quote of 2 whole paragraphs, and then of course it's got the fig caption there. But there's one thing that we haven't done yet, which is kind of styling the block quote itself. A lot of times the systems will use like a border on the left side and then shrink it down just a little bit. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to do a padding left. Let's do 2 pixels, solid, and then I've got a CSS variable here for my color. And then we are also going to need, that is padding left. That should be a border left. And we do need a padding left. And we'll just go ahead and do 1 rem for now and see how that looks. So if I go back to Chrome and I refresh, you can see now I've got this little line here on the left side. That's just kind of a standard convention that I've seen all over the internet. That's very common for email, for Slack messages, for block quotes on other blogs and internet web pages and stuff like that. That bar just gives it a little bit of a grouping sensation. And of course, having it a little bit of a different padding than the main block of text is also another way to do that. You'll actually see that in printed books without this bar. This is very common to see as you're reading books that are quoting something. They'll crunch in that space a little bit. It's a little bit more narrow until we come back to the rest of the typical alignment for our full page text. That's one way to do it. And of course, we can always turn back that border on because that's kind of more of a web convention. So depending on the styles and what your preference is, there's a couple ways to style up your block quotes. And of course, it's going to update all of the block quotes on the page. So if we go, we can see it's got that on all of them. So these are the best ways that you can inject a little bit more professionalism and detail orientation into your web pages. Any creative director or senior designer, they're going to be keyed into seeing those kind of details when you show it in your portfolio, if you show it at your work. All of that adds up. So enjoy, and that will be your quotation flow for today. Thanks for watching.